Good Tov, everybody. It's so good to see everybody. Let's learn a little bit of Torah together. Here we go. So the first thing that we're going to just to put ourselves into context, we are learning about the whys of Judaism. We're looking a little bit about Jewish dietary law, Jewish eating. Before we start, I want to take a moment to thank Ricky Adler, who is sponsoring our shir, Le'il Nishmas, Dr. David Adler, Le'il Nishmas David Naftali ben Harav Yehuda v'China Beila. And this is David's second yard site coming up this week. And first of all, the one thing to be aware of is that Baruch Hashem, just a few weeks ago, he has a namesake. So his grandson is born in Israel, is named for him, which is very, very special, David Naftali. And for us, for all of us who are here, we remember David very, very well. And we all have very special relationships with Dr. Adler, a person who not only just saved many lives, but was a person who had much more in him than he ever let out of him. And we all appreciated him very, very, very deeply as a human being, as a person who exemplified what it means to be a mensch in every aspect of life. And so Be'ezra Hashem, his neshama shel Aliyah this coming week on his second yard site. Let's start learning. Our topic today is going to be kashrus, essentially, Jewish dietary law. There are so many questions. Some of them seem simple. Some of them are more complex as well. Some of them, I'm sure that some of us are familiar with, but I'm guarantee there's going to be things you're going to say, wait a second, I had no idea. So let's start at the very beginning. The most basic thing over here is why is it that the Torah actually cares about what we put in our mouths or not? Like, what difference does it make to the Almighty as to what we put in our mouths or don't put in our mouths? And the answer to that is very simple, and that is because the Torah told us. And the meaning to say, we don't have access behind the panel to know why it is that God told us to do certain things or not to do certain things. That's what's called a gzeiras hakasov, meaning it's a decree. However, within that gzeira, we know that there are reasons. So many books written on these topics, as an example, on biblical mitzvahs. The Sefer HaChinuch writes a book on this. The Rambam writes on this. There are many people who talk about this. So here are a few ideas. Here are a few things to think about. Number one is that, isn't it interesting that there's the organ in your body which is used for the most basic survival instinct, which is consuming food in order to be able to survive, is the same organ used for the most sophisticated of human creativity, which is your mouth for expression and survival. Isn't that interesting? God could have made it that those were two separate departments, right? Meaning to say, the rest of your digestive tract is not doing anything very creative, right? The rest of your digestive tract is something that we use in private spaces, but like apparently the mouth is something which you use for the most creative of it. And it's amazing, you can do this in the same sitting. You'll be invited to a meal, and you'll be sitting there stuffing your gullet, and then you'll get up to give a speech, right? In the same setting, right? So apparently the Torah is concerned that the manner in which we use it for input is very important for the manner in which we use it for output as well. Just on a basic level, we have to be careful about what we eat, not just what we say, which is a very profound truth, which is necessary to think about. But it's more than that as well. And by the way, if anybody wants sources, I've written this all up, but I didn't want to distract everybody with this. But I've written this all up word for word, just so to have a sense if anybody wants this afterwards. And another few things as well. The Torah tells us that we need to sanctify the way that we eat. Right, we're a holy people. Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem. I am holy, and you're going to be holy, which is what he says at the end of the dietary laws. Therefore, we have to be very careful what we put inside our mouths as well. Some would suggest, as an example, that there's also an element of empathy, which is in our dietary laws. As an example, we're not allowed to eat an aver min achai, a limb of a living animal. We're not allowed to consume blood. We're not allowed to eat an animal and its child on the same day. There's many aspects of dietary law which relate to a lack of cruelty, the way that we consume things. Another angle of this is that kosher foods are, generally speaking, more healthy, says the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, that are more healthy than non-kosher foods. This is not the reason. This is we'll call it added benefit. So meaning to say that some people today say it's kosher is more healthy, which means therefore if I'm vegan, I'm more kosher. It's like, no, that's not how it works. So meaning the kosher is what the Torah prescribes. But happens to be that some of the aspects of kosher happen to align with healthier eating habits in general as well. That's meaning intrinsically and also just because of the oversight which is necessary as well. The Ramban points out that many of the non-kosher meats are animals which are predators. Right? So if you look at the birds as an example, most of the non-kosher birds and non-kosher fish, by the way, for that matter, are predators. And it's interesting the Torah does not want us to consume predators, right? Because there's a cruelty in the animal itself. We're not supposed to imbibe that aspect of cruelty as well. Another example. Then you could just say it might actually not be specifically about the actual item or not. It might be about the effect, the idea that we exercise restraint. Think what it must be like for a moment to be a non-observant Jew or a non-Jew. You're driving along the road, you're hungry. And the question you have to ask yourself is, which place do I stop at to eat? Oh, there's a new restaurant. Let's stop there. Oh, there's a diner. Okay. Oh, there's a rest stop. Let's have lunch. Right? That's how it works. There's absolutely no restraint. I don't understand why a person who's not an observant Jew is not obese just because you can eat anywhere at any time. There's nothing stop. You don't have to pack lunch ever. You just go as an observant Jew. Like, that's it. You leave the New York metro area, and that's it. If you don't have, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? You're going to be surviving on, chocolate bars at the rest stops. It's so much more difficult, right? So there's an element of restraint, which means that in the area which most people are so involved in, the food industry, from Jews is much more complicated, right? You're on the cruise with the airplane meals, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's complicated. And the way that the Ramban explains this is that mitzvahs are the tzaref esabrios. The Medrash says, does it make a difference to Hashem that you shechted from here or there? Like, does it really make a difference? The Medrash says, it says, no, ela letzaref esabrios, which means to smelt us. Meaning as we act with restraint, because, not just because, without even there being a logical reason that we understand, that itself is refining us as a human being. That's another element of it. An additional element of it, there's so many different levels, is there's a notion of what's called timtum alev. Timtum alev literally means that the heart is blocked up. This is not talking about calcification. This is not talking about the needs for stents. This is the idea that there's a spiritual blockage which happens to people who eat food which is not not spiritually good. In fact, people who grow up not having had eaten kosher food, it takes time to be able to refine one's soul to be able to appreciate spiritual ideas. That there's a connection between the Timtum Alev. The Gemara talks about this. The Gemara actually is talking, the way it places mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, interestingly enough, is talking about a Jewish baby nursing from a non-Jewish mother. And that's what the Shulchan Aruch says in Siman Pei Aleph in Yoreh De'ah, that although it's technically allowed, but there's a problem of Timtum Alev, right? There's a problem of Timtum Alev, and if you look at the later Mefarshim, they say that refers to all non-kosher foods, which is why you have to be so careful. You can't just say, well, they're just a child, what difference does it make? You have to be so careful.
That's what Miriam and
Moshe. So we'll just point out the Vilna Gaon. I love this note that you're referring to in Yoreh De'ah Pei Aleph. The Vilna Gaon in his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch says the reason for that is because of Moshe Rabbeinu. Because you see, by Moshe Rabbeinu, Miriam goes and calls this Jewish nursemaid who happens to be his mother, and gives. The problem with that Vilna Gaon, I just want to, as an aside, is that does not make sense, because that's not how you regulate society. You don't say like this, wow, like the greatest leader of all time is over here, and because of him, we're going to now, and he needed to have special, milking, he had to be nursed from a Jewish mother, so it's too much of an anomaly to do that. So, Emes Ya'akov Kamenetsky, on that commentary he has on Shulchan Aruch, the Emes Ya'akov on Yoreh De'ah, says, yes, that's how we raise our children. We raise our children that everyone can be a Moshe Rabbeinu. Just anyways, that's what the Emes Ya'akov says on that Vilna Gaon. Okay, but anyways, but Bezamei, And so why are we doing this? Why are we doing all these laws? The answer is because God told us. But in addition to that, there happens to be that there's many multiple layers which relate to us rationally, spiritually as well. Many more as well. We're going to do 3 movements. We're going to look at a little bit. We're going to move to the kitchen, to the restaurant, and then back to the table. Okay? So let's start in the kitchen for a second. I walk into a Jewish home and I see 2 ovens, and I walk into a Jewish home and I see 2 sinks. Why is it that everybody does this? The truth is like this. Let's just break it down very carefully. The Torah tells us you're not allowed to eat milk and meat together. In fact, it tells us 3 times, and that's to include 3 Yisurim. One is to eat, one is to cook, and one is to get benefit from meat and milk, which is not the same as treif, regular non-kosher meat. You can benefit from, right? You can cook. There's no prohibitions there. But when it comes to milk and meat, it has these 3 levels of prohibition. Okay. So let's say I'm going to be good. I'm not going to cook the meat together. I'm not going to eat the meat and milk together. Why does that affect the orientation of my kitchen? The reason is because in fact it's not just that I'm taking a slab of meat and a piece of cheese and putting them together. It's that even the dishes I cook can't have a problem because any time there's a heat interchange, there's absorption of taste. So therefore, if I have the same pan, if I have the same plate, which I'm using for my meat and my milk, which I inevitably will use for hot and cold, for hot consumption, then that plate is going to absorb the taste of the meat. And I can clean that. I can get rid of what's called the be'ain or the mamashus, the actual meat itself, the actual meat and milk itself. But the next time I place hot on that, there's going to be also the taste, which is possible, which is absorbed into the food. And therefore, common practice is to have 2 sets of dishes for meat and milk. We're all good. This is all on the same page. No rocket science here, right? Okay? You don't like this.
I don't like it because, everything is glazed today. I think things back then were simple earthenware.
So you're right. By the way, so there was a lot more absorption in the more rudimentary vessels itself. At the same time, I remember when I was doing industrial kashrus and I was taking a tour through industrial kitchens. You pointed out that you can have let's say these steam jackets, right? So these are these major pots, for gallons of soup. That's how they do it industrially, and you can clean it out as much as you want inside. If you boil the water, clean water again, it'll always be murky by the end of boiling water. Meaning to say that there's always absorptions. We don't necessarily always see it. And this is stainless steel. Right, so they were just pointing out is that there is a notion of absorptions. How long it matters, and there are limitations in terms of time, but in terms of certainly in at least the first 24 hours.
So then, when you kasher your pot for Pesach,
yes,
how many times would you have to change that boiling water really in order to get rid of what was?
It depends on the volume. It really depends on the volume. Meaning, say if you're kashering, let's say if you're kashering just forks and knives, the volume of the forks and the knives is immaterial compared to the neutral water. But you're right, if you're doing a much bigger job, that's why they have those crazy pots in the streets, and things like that. But you're right. There are limits as to size, what kind of pots you're using, how much water you're using. There is. But be it as it may, the assumption, the working assumption is there is absorption. There is absorption, there is taste. If that's a concern, then we make sure to have 2 separate sets of dishes. And in fact, so much so that there's a prohibition, there's a gzeira on changing the orientation of your pots. You're not allowed to do hagala from milk to meat or meat to milk, right? You can do it to neutral, but to parav, but you can't do it from meat to milk because otherwise, what's people going to do? I'll be like, I'll be conservative on my spending. I'm going to have 1 set of pots and I'll change them every meal. And what's going to end up happening is you're not going to change them, and it wasn't really clean, and it was within 24 hours, and mistakes will happen. Okay.
Your energy bills will be through the roof.
But I've saved money on the dishes. Okay. So the truth is but then how does it relate to our sinks? How does it relate to our sinks? I was like, Mark. First of all, Mark, welcome back. It's so nice to have you and Perry back in town.
Thank you. But maybe after I finish with the questions, you won't be so happy.
Okay.
Let's just say in this neighborhood, it's not uncommon for people to have 2 dishwashers. When you get to Eretz Yisrael, it is very uncommon and much more common for people to use their dishwashers for both milchets and fleishiks. And they use the concept, I think, of nosen tam lifgam, that the soap that they put into the dishwasher will destroy whatever taste.
So let's take a step back because I haven't even got to the dishes yet. You see, so let's come back to the sinks and we'll get to the dishwashers afterwards, right? So let's do the sinks for a second. So what's the problem with the sink? Like you could ask yourself, what's the problem with the sink? So like if I just wash my dishes separately, right, it should be fine, right? So and by the way, for most of history, people only had one sink, if any sinks, right? So like, why is that two sinks? So the truth is like this. Let's say you have one sink. It shouldn't really be a problem because all you need to do is to wash your dishes separately, have a separate drying rack for them to be drying on, and it should be all right. The problem really becomes is that when you're dealing with hot water and you're doing a rinse, right? So even let's say like there's hot water that's just coming down and it's hitting the remains of your meatballs, right? And it's splashing onto the walls of your sink. So your sink is over time absorbing hot meat, right? But then the same thing's happening with your breakfast cereal as well. So inevitably at a certain point, your sink is treif. And that's fine. And that's fine because you're not eating off your sink. But that's why in the old days, if you remember, in your apartment days, right? So how like when you just got married, the houses work, you have one sink, that's just the way it is, and you have an insert or you have a rack. And that's the point, is you're not going to be putting your dishes directly on the surface of the sink because the sink is likely treif over time. That's all. And that's how it works. You have a separate drying rack, but you wash because there's hot water. And when there's hot water and you have mamashos, actual real milk and meat, which is what's usually lying in a sink, that's how people have racks or inserts. And when you get to the stage where you can afford to have two sinks, matov manaim, much easier, no racks, no inserts necessary. Okay, let's take it one step further now. But wait a second, what about the dishwasher, right? So the truth is like this, is that dishwashers are more complicated, and I can't speak to the people the many people in Israel as such, but dishwashers are more complicated for a few reasons. Number one is if you've ever been, and I'm going home to do this right now, if you're ever going to be, taking the dishes out of your dishwasher, you will notice that it's not just the dishes that are left in the dishwasher, it's the stuff that was on them that also accumulates in all the cracks and the places. So, meaning a regular dishwasher is not just dealing with time, it's dealing with mamashos, actual real meat and pieces and stuff and noodles, and it's all there, right? It's in the filter, it's around the bottom, it's behind the dish, but the cutlery insert, so it's all there. That you don't, there's no time to gum for that. Number two is that dishwashers also, it depends on their cycle. It depends, is their cycle a rinse cycle first or a soap cycle first? If it's a rinse cycle, you have a problem because there's no time to gum for the soap then. So it really depends. That's why it's not so simple. It also depends on what are the walls of the dishwasher made of. Many old dishwashers are made with ceramic walls, right? You can't kasher that. There's no way to kasher that. But today, generally speaking, a lot of them are metal. Metal is generally fine, but plastic is b'shas adchak. So are you putting yourself into a situation of b'shas adchak to rely on kashering plastic every time? More complicated. So I'm just saying it's laden with questions. So it's more complicated. Yes.
Can I go back to things just for 1 second?
Sure.
Most balabusters in between meals will take soft scrub or Ajax and take the whole sink and scrub it out.
Yep.
So in that case, you have the soap all over the sink, all the bits and pieces you throw into the garbage. So even if even if you don't have a rack, or let's say together with a rack, you're not, you have the soap that annuls all the food, all the good taste of the food that was, the meatballs or the noodles that were in there prior.
So you're right. So if that's the situation all the time, but that's not the situation all the time. Meaning, say the situation all the time is somebody is putting their cereal bowl there. Somebody is placing their plate there after supper that you weren't there, and you didn't just Ajax the walls. And then somebody else is switching on the hot tap just to rinse their hands. This is all happening because that's how food is. That being the case, is that it's a good idea to have the milks insert and the meat insert, just so that you're not having interaction with the walls and your dishes. That's the only thing we're stopping in the one sink. It's just one step of barrier for that. The question becomes, what about the ovens? So again, most people have one oven, right? But the luxury of two ovens is an amazing thing. But how does that work? So it just depends. In the old days, so you're coming back to in the old days, things weren't ventilated so well, so it was much more of an issue. Today our ventilation is, you can hear even after the cycle, you can hear the ventilation still working. So generally speaking, the general practice today is to have an oven which is oriented one way. So people usually, if you have one oven, they usually oriented meat. And then if there's any milk or parav, you'll cook it wrapped. Some people say double wrapped. But the point is that you're not absorbing the steam, because what happens in ovens is inevitably there's splashes, right? And inevitably there's steam. So you certainly can't cook at the same time, the same oven open. That would be not allowed. But like, let's say if the oven's cooled down and it's afterwards, you could, there are people who are matir even cooking one after another. But generally speaking, the general way we do it is we orient it one direction, and the other direction we do covered, so that there's not going to be absorptions from the steam which is touching all the splashes and which is going to be going in and sort of mixing into liquid dishes, right? If it's a solid dish, it might be more simple to have it uncovered because there's less of a steam interchange that is happening then. But generally speaking, that's the way it works today. You'll see that people, generally speaking, were a little more makil in the previous years when we didn't have this luxury in terms of doing things bezeh achar zeh, one after another, when they just simply had that as one option. But these are sort of called the practical ramifications of the meat and milk, which makes life a little more sensitive, which means to say we just think a little bit more what we're doing. Some people say, I'm going to always use the oven for meat, and I'll have my toaster oven, my large toaster oven will be if the lasagna needs to go, or whatever else it is, will go there, and I'm not going to even touch the oven for milk. It makes it a little easier, less to think about it. Now, let's go to a simple one. Why is it that Jews, they say that Jews are scared of three things. One is days you have to do tachanun, right? Doing Netilas Yadayim and becoming fleshik, right? These are like the biggest concerns in Jewish history. So why is that Jews wait afterwards? So the Gemara tells us that Mar Ukva said his dad used to wait 24 hours to the hour after eating meat. That was his barrier between eating milk and milk. You can imagine that must have been pretty hard. What did Mrs. Mar Ukva say about that? It must have been very difficult. But nonetheless, he says, but I'm so much lower than my father's custom. I wait misuda l'suda. I wait from meal to meal. What does that mean precisely? So there's a debate. The one explanation, which is the one that we generally adopt, is the suda means from the two meals that you have in a day, right? There was no Kellogg's in those days. No one was advertising that there's something called breakfast for champions. They had two meals. They had lunch and they had supper. And the difference in time between the two of them was 6 hours. And therefore that's from lunchtime to when it gets dark, 6 hours. That's what it was. And that's why we wait 6 hours as this barrier. Why do you wait that? Like, what's the point of that? And the one reason the Rambam says is because when you eat meat, you're always shucking on something in your teeth, right? Because you get something behind those molars, and there's always pieces of meat left behind. So that's why the problem. Whereas Rashi says it's a different reason. It's not about the specific pieces of meat. It's because when you eat meat, there's like an oily, like film in your mouth, which takes a little bit of time to dissipate, just to sort of like lose that. It's not the problem of digesting. You're allowed to digest milk and meat, meaning like inevitably, let's say they're in the same digestive tract. That's not the issue. It's how they're mixing as you're eating in the consumption process. Okay. Being as that is the case, then there's actually another opinion, and that is ben suda l'suda, based on Rabbeinu Tam, doesn't mean like the Rambam says between meals. It means an hour. Usually like a gap. It literally means like from one meal to the other. It's like the American meal, right? It keeps going, right? There's like a snack, and there's like a donuts, and there's coffee, and there's another snack, and then there's supper, right? It's like there's never really it's just a continuum, right, of eating. So if that's the case, then so as long as there's a gap between meal to meal, that's sufficient. How do we paskin? It depends on the community. So some Jews, let's say the Jews from the Netherlands, keep 1 hour. The Jews from other areas keep 6 hours. Then you say, but I come from the 3 hour Jews. So the truth is, the 3 hour Jews are not mentioned in Shulchan Aruch at all. That doesn't, right? It just isn't there, right? But where does it come from? It's a very significant minhag. So interesting enough, the explanation is given is that the bein suda l'suda between lunch and supper must be that it's relating to even in the northern reaches of Europe, which is when in the winter, like now, the dark is so early. And remember, when lights are out, that's the end of the business day. Nobody's doing anything, right? So at that point in time, there could be a 3 hour difference, right? It could be supper just lunch to supper, those 2 meals. At the minimum shear is 3, which is where the minhag of 3 hours developed, and that is where that comes from. And people were like this. That's like sometimes even makes shidduchim. This kind of arrangement. It's like he keeps 3 hours, right? I'm like, it makes a big difference. It's going to change a lot of things. But that is the minhag. So people should follow the family minhag. If a person, let's say, is a non-observant Jew, or a person's converting to Judaism and they're coming in fresh without any family minhag, they should do 6. That's seen as the standard as well. Okay, why is it that we don't wait the other way around? So the reason is, the Gemara talks about this, is simple, is because there's not the same concerns, right? There's the cheese products aren't as oily, and cheese products don't have like large pieces that get stuck between the teeth. Now, yes, melted cheese today, right, is very oily, but it's not the same kind of oil like animal oil that's sticking between that's the film around the mouth. However, it is worthwhile noting 2 howevers. The Gemara does say you need to do 2 things, and that is you need to wash your hands, and you need to clean your mouth out by liquid and solid, which means I need to wash my mouth out, but after eating milk and I want to eat meat, and I also need to chew something neutral like bread, which is going to just clean those teeth down from anything which is left on that. So that is required. You can't just go milk to meat. You need to have those barriers, as the Gemara says. Just washing. It's just washing hands. In fact, the Gemara says if you can check your hands in the day, it's fine at that daytime. That's not the way I work with my kids at mealtime. I'm like, you got to wash your hands either way. But that's what the Gemara technically says. It's worthwhile noting that there is an observation made in the Ramah, and he says, but hard cheese does require 6 hours. And then the Pischei Tshuva says, because there was a situation of people, there was a particular, I don't remember who it was, who was eating and he found hard cheese in his mouth many hours later, right? It happens. So how do we paskin? What does that mean? So the Taz explains, no. With the type of cheese we talk about is wormy cheese. Now, if you want to look on that, it's pretty disgusting. It's actually illegal these days. But there is such thing as pungent cheese, which is such. The Shach says no. It's cheese which is aged for 6 months. Right, so a cheese which is so pungent was aged for 6 months. That's what it requires. The wait for 6 hours. Interesting. And Rav Moshe Feinstein says no. It's not the kind of cheese we talk about today. The cheese that's aged is it was dried so much so you need a hatchet to break it. I mean, like that's the kind of cheese which will survive without being in a fridge. That's the type of cheese which really is not the common cheese we're dealing with today. Generally speaking, the OU's position is Parmesan. It does require a 6 hour wait. Does the level of time necessary to wait for that, which is only if it's in solid state. If the Parmesan is melted on your noodles in the restaurant, you don't need to. But if it's solid, you would need to wait to the 6 hours. Interesting difference. In Israel, they're more machmir on this. In Israel, Rosh Shlomo Zalman became more machmir on this, which is why they paskin different to Rav Moshe Feinstein in Chutz Haaretz. And for most hard cheeses, they would say you should wait. Interesting enough, based on the let's say not cottage cheese, cream cheese, but the actual yellow hard cheese. Yeah, we've been knowing.
Aged cheeses or any kind?
It seems to be that aged cheeses, but he said the question was also about gvina, which was yellow. Yellow cheese was the question he was asked. Interesting. Okay, I speak to the kashrus agencies in Israel, of which there are many, and see what their policies are. Yes?
While we're on the topic, is the 6 hours, is it a fulfillment of 6 full hours, or is it something?
Yeah. So the Rambam says Kosher SGS. So Rav Shlomo Zalman in the Mincha Shlomo says, understands it's into the 6th hour, so it's 5 hours 1 minute. Generally speaking, if that's your family, I go for it. But if it's not, stick with 6 hours because that's what 6 hours are, right? So it's like if I look at it from this angle, it's like no, okay. So yeah. So there is room to be makil in situations of shas d'chak. So that extra hour shas d'chak. Here's the example of where it's used. I'll give you an example of where it's applied. Is when you have set institutional meals. As an example, the army or yeshivas. So lunchtime is at 1:15 every day, and the cook is going to produce 600 meals, and then supper time is at 5:30, and they're going to. So if it's within the 5 hours, and it goes from meat to in Israel, which is very predominant, because the main meal of the day is lunch, as opposed to America, where the main meal is supper. Right? It's much more healthier Mediterranean diet. The main meal is meat, lunch, and then a lighter supper, right? So you digest and you can sleep properly, right? So that then you're going to have your milk afterwards. So if that's institutionally and within the 5 hours, the place can say for yeshivas in the army, it's all right. Because but if you're you're just making your supper whenever you're making your supper, make your supper a little later. Okay. What about meat and fish. Why do Jews concerned about that? So the Gemara describes this, and by the way, it's a very obscure Gemara in Psachim, Daf Ayin Vav Beis, and it's a very, very obscure Gemara talking about a particular type of fish and meat, and you'd be concerned about davar acher, perhaps tzaras, whatever that means. There's a concern health-wise, and the Shulchan Aruch says that you shouldn't eat fish and meat together, and you shouldn't cook on the same dishes at the same time. You shouldn't be when it's dirty. Okay, that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. But then the question is like, but tachlis, like there isn't such a concern. Meaning, today, medically speaking, there's no doctor who's going to tell you don't have meat and fish together, right? Dr. Weinberg, I don't know. Dr. Moskowitz, I don't know. There doesn't seem to be medical research today, and the Magen Avram says this already a few hundred years ago. So the Magen Avram says it isn't the case, right? Maybe it's based on the science of the times of the Gemara. But that doesn't seem to be the issue today. So the Magen Avram says, I'm not so concerned about this. However, let's say the Darkei Tshuva, there's many other points can say, well, you're going to play games like with Sakana, Chamira Sakanta Me'yisur. You have to be very careful with when it comes to Sakana, even if it's a Savik Sakana. So the Chasam Sofer says, you know what? Maybe the reason is no longer valid. We're doing it because it's a rabbinic decree, and we're going to continue doing it this way, which is what the OU Kashrus policy is. We're careful with these things. Maybe it's a spiritual danger more than a physical danger. We don't know. But be as it may, this is still in policy. Here's the one which I guarantee most people don't know about. What about fish and milk? Okay, now this we don't know about. It turns out that the fish and milk is an explicit Mishnah you're allowed to have it. Because the Mishnah is describing what types of meat you're allowed to have with milk. You're not allowed to have the meat of animals, and you're not even allowed to have the meat of birds. That's called avian meat, which we call today chicken or turkey. You're not allowed to have with milk. But then the Mishnah says, but what about the meat of grasshoppers? Right? Because many grasshoppers are kosher. And the Gemara says, and the Mishnah says, and the meat of fish you can have with milk, no problem. So it's explicit in the Mishnah, you're allowed to have it. So why is there a problem? The problem is that there's a Beis Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo, in Siman Pei Zayin in Shulchan Aruch in Yoredea. In the footnote he says you should be careful with milk and fish. And because of sakana, because of danger, similar to fish and meat. The problem is that in the Shulchan Aruch, he quotes the Mishnah saying that fish and milk is fine. So therefore, says the Ramah, the Darkei Moshe, on the commentary in Shulchan Aruch, he says, it must be a printing error. Right? It's explicit in the Mishnah, it's allowed, and it's explicit in Shulchan Aruch, it's allowed. So what he said there in the Beis Yosef, which is his commentary on the Tur, the Proto Shulchan Aruch, clearly must be a mistake, and therefore the Ashkenazim say, there's no such custom. However, some Sfardim say, but that Beis Yosef needs to be taken carefully, which is why you'll have some Sfardim, and there's different called stripes of Sfardim when it comes to this. Some Sfardim will say, no fish, no tuna melts at all. That's it. That in a Sephardic hashkacha restaurant, there will not be tuna melts, right? Because that's cheese and fish. So you're not going to have that. Some Sephardim say it's all right as long as it's not butter, right? And some Sephardim say the Ashkenazim are right. And they ignore this, but it is fascinating because as an Ashkenazi, you don't realize there's an entire different department in halacha when it comes to this, based on this particular unusual Beis Yosef, which appears 500 years ago. Yes.
Going back to the fish and meat.
Yes.
The common problem is that when people go to smokesboards, right? They come in, they see.
Totally, yeah.
There's no line for the conversation. I'll get.
Yep.
Oh, then I'll get sushi afterwards.
Totally, yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes, it
You
is.
have to wash your mouth in between.
Yes. No, so you do not need to wash your mouth in between. And in fact, you also don't need to what's very common is people come and say, Rabbi, they have fish and meat, how can you allow them to, nobody knows? At a certain point, the Shulchan Aruch says, when it comes to milk and meat, you need to have signs, if people are consuming at the same time. Fish and meat, the level of Isser is not high enough to warrant a geder of such. And we have to assume that people can just exercise their basic, we'll call it gastronomical acumen to figure it out.
Time after the fish on Shabbos.
Yeah, so some people do that to make a difference. But what I'm just saying is that if you're at a smorgasbord, so you can walk past the sushi station, and then the salmon station, and then there's the cholent station, and it's very easy for a person to mix them up. But because the level of severity of mixing also determines the level of guardrails that are around it as well. So which is why there's less of that concern. As on an average kiddush, you'll have a fish table and a meat table, even sometimes on the same table, and it's fine. People.
Utensils?
There should be separate utensils. The Shulchan Aruch says separate utensils. It's explicit in Shulchan Aruch Kuf Tez Zayin. Beis and Gimel. Gimel's where he says utensils. Beis is where he talks about this. So, anyways, it is talked about. Okay, beautiful may. Now let's move a little further. So what's this business about the cutlery in the water for a second? Like why do we need this cutlery in the water? So the thing is like this: if something becomes treif, then you can you kasher it? It depends. Many times you can, but the rule is kaboloi kach poltoi. The way it absorbed is the way it needs to be cleaned. So let's say you have something which is treifed up through dry heat. That's much more severe. In order to be able to do that, you need to bring it to a level of libun kal, or at least or libun gomor, which means to say you need dry heat to kasher it. So for instance, grapes are more complicated to kasher, right? Because it's dry heat. But let's say it's my spoon, which was used in the soup, and it was the wrong spoon in the wrong soup, and so on and so forth. That spoon was, the interface of treif was liquid, and so therefore it needs to be, the way it's kashered is through boiling liquid, which is called hagala, which means it needs to wait 24 hours, so any absorptions in it are what's called nesatam nifkam, which means that it's already deteriorated taste. You drop it into boiling water, and put it in cold water right afterwards. Most people don't know that step of the hagala process, and you're good, right? And then it's neutralized, so it's not got anything on it, and there's nothing, and there's no tastes or even minimal taste in it, and you're set. That's the process of hagala. Why is the Jews would drop their vessels into water before they use them? This is not to do with hagala. This is not kashering them. This is a separate process. When the Jews conquered the land of Midian, or the armies of Midian, they had many spoils. At the beginning of Parshas Matos, Moshe Rabbeinu tells us that in order to be able to use the non-Jewish kelim, what do you need to do? You need to kol shatiru b'mayim tavru b'mayim, right? You have to put it through water. What that means is it needs to have tefillah. This is called tefillas kelim. It's a mitzvah mid'oraisa. It's a biblical mitzvah to do tefillas kelim. This is if it's made or owned by a non-Jew. In that case, you need to kasher it. This is obviated in many cases when you have, let's say, something made in Israel by a Jewish artisan. It doesn't require the tefillah in that case. This is separate to the hagala. This is not kashering. This is not about absorption or taste. This is a separate decree that relates to having new vessels. What about all kinds of complicated vessels, like mercurig? So, generally speaking, electric vessels can be toveled. Electronic vessels cannot be toveled. So electric means my toaster, my George Foreman, my Betty Crocker. Those all can go in the mikveh, no problem. I've done it all of ours. You just let it dry for a while in a nice warm place, and it's all right. When it comes to a Keurig, which has got circuit boards, that's more complicated. Those things get messed up completely, and you shouldn't tovel them because you'll not have a vessel at the end. So there's a few ways to get around it. Some people say if the only way to tovel is to break it, then it doesn't need tefillah. Some people point out you can break it yourself and make it yourself, then it's made by a Jew. So just do this very carefully. But if you take out a component and put it back in, you're completing it. Or some people just say is wait for a good snow day, right? Because if you get enough snow in one place, you can do tefillah as well with this as well. Just different perspectives when it comes to this as well. Now, why is it that okay? Let's do a few things quickly. Yes.
Well, I think there is an old
Adage,
very old minhag, that if you end up putting a milchiks or a fleischiks utensil, fork, spoon in the wrong flavor, so to speak.
Yep, wrong orientation.
Right, then the people put it in a flower pot, put it in the dirt.
No, so what that is, the Ramah quotes this, and this is specifically in a situation where I have a knife, right? And I have a knife which I was not able to be tovel, and it's the wrong orientation. So what I do is I stick it in the ground. The Ramos says 10 times. It's a way of very carefully cleaning the blade if there's any particles on it. That's what he suggested. It specifically applies. I'm just trying to remember the case that he's talking about because we just did this. Jonathan, help me here. We just did this in.
And you had the king who took his utensil and put it in 10 times.
Yeah.
And he did it for one Jew, but he didn't do it for the other Jew.
So I don't remember. There we go. Very good. It's in the Ramah at the end of Simon Pei Zion, and it's a very interesting thing. I don't remember specifically the case that it applies to, but be it as it may, it is definitely one of the most obscure practices you will see Jews doing, right? Which is taking the knife out into the backyard. But it's specifically hard earth, because then it cleans the sides of the blade. It's we're talking about when it's you're worried that there's something which is a film on the blade as well. It doesn't apply to other things, so it wouldn't work for a spoon. It wouldn't work for anything else. It's specifically a blade that in and out. Again, like this is the kind of situation you come to at Airbnb, but I don't remember specifically, so I don't want to say offhand. Is it all right if I hold questions for a second? Because there's so much more exciting stuff. We just got to the beginning. So a few things over here is
I think it's because you need force.
You need force, but I'm just trying to remember the specific situation. You're right. I just trying to remember the specific case that it applies to, because it's not all cases. That's why I'm going to be careful. Okay, let's just do a few things quickly. Why is it that Jews keep washing lettuce? So the point is not really the washing; it's actually the checking of the lettuce, because you're not allowed to consume bugs. Eating bugs is like eating treif, right? So it's actually worse than eating treif meat, because there's more isurim involved in eating bugs. So you need to check your lettuce. It's been washed 3 times. It says that on the bag. Yes, but they didn't check it. So you need to check at least a handful of each bag, even if it's triple washed as well. Why do we not check carrots? The answer is because carrots aren't infested. Right, so root plants, generally speaking, aren't infested. If there is an infestation, you do need to check them. But generally speaking, leafy plants do need checking, and each plant has got a way of checking it, because there's different types of bugs which inhabit those different types of things. Why does the Jews check eggs? So we check eggs because of blood spots, because it could be a fertilized egg. Today, most eggs that we're eating, unless they're wild eggs or organic eggs, are not free range. Thank you. Are not fertilized, and if they're not fertilized, it's less of an issue. People still check them. It's less of a concern today, just because most eggs are not fertilized. They're buying from the store. But if it is free range, it is more significant. So then you kick the can up the road again. So why can't eat blood? The reason is the Torah tells us you cannot eat blood, and the Torah actually gives the reason. It says ki adam hu hanefesh. What does that mean? Not so simple. It means the blood is the soul. So it is interesting that one of the times that tells us lo sochel al adam, it says lo sanachashu. You should not use sorcery or superstition, which indicates that eating blood seems to be connected to pagan ritual, right? So there seems to be a connection between eating blood and pagan society, and also there's another element of sensitivity. It's grob. It's not nice, right, to eat blood, besides the fact that the Torah just said so as well. If you're interested in a fascinating footnote, I found a footnote of Rav Aryeh Kaplan's footnoting of the Derech Hashem, the Ramchal. And on this mitzvah, he makes it the real money is always in the back and the footnotes. So in the back in the footnotes there, he points out that the Torah is actually describing. He believes that Ki Adam Hu Hanefesh refers to the neural pathways of the body, right? Then the dam is the closest the Torah can give us in the language that we could understand in medical science in those days. But okay, be it as it may, very very interesting observation as to what this means. Okay, why is kosher meat more expensive than non-kosher meat? The answer is because there's more people involved. So anytime you're paying more, there's more. You're paying for more people, like involvement, more labor. What does that mean precisely? Is that for kosher meat, you can't just shoot it, right? That's much easier, right? You have to have expertise, and there's shchita, and the person who's a shoichet doesn't just have to have the physical expertise, he needs to also have the halachic expertise, which means there's less people who can do that. To do shkita, which costs a lot of money. In addition, there has to be some level of hashkacha as to ensuring that meat that was shechted there is going in the right direction, which means there's more personnel. More personnel means more money. In addition, when you shecht a cow, generally speaking in America, you're only eating the front area of the cow. You're not eating the back area of the cow, because there's a lack of expertise in nikur in removing the geranasha, which means to say is that half the animal is being sold out, which means as well that there's a limited amount of meat when it comes to this. In addition, not all cows are kosher, which means you can shecht a cow, but there's 24 different areas in the body which need to be checked. What's called treifa. We use the word treif to mean non-kosher meat. It's not precise. The word for most non-kosher meat you'll find at a non-kosher supermarket is actually nevelos. Nevelos means a kosher animal that was shot in the head, that was killed without shchit. That's a nevela. Treifa actually refers to an animal which had a terminal illness, which means there was a hole in the heart, there was a hole in the lung, there was a problem in an internal organ. Generally speaking, we don't check all 24 of them, but there's specific organs that are checked. One of the one which is checked is the lungs. If there's a sircha, if there's certain problems or lesions in the lungs, that would invalidate that cow, which means you've invested the money to do the shchita, and the meat is not available. You have to sell it out. So there's losses in that way as well. There's just a lot of reasons as to why kosher meat actually has a lot more personnel and a lot more, we'll call, limited supply than non-kosher meat as well. Why is it that there are kosher symbols on food? So here's the thing: is let's say you have a neighbor who invites you out for lunch. And like you haven't like checked where do they go to school, where do they learn kashrus, what do their mom do, like you don't know that stuff. So how are you able to eat out? The answer is there's a general chazak, there's an assumption that if a person's shomer Shabbos and a person is generally speaking keeping Jewish law, you can assume that part of the Jewish law they keep is going to be kashrus as well. If there's like red flags and their Judaism is kind of very loosey goosey, right, about everything else, then you have to be more questions, like a little more questionable about their level of kashrus. But that's a personal decision, because that's a decision you're making. You can rely on a chazaka when it comes to eating in their house. This all changes when it comes to when they sell food. And it's such an important, people completely miss this. It's like, but I would eat in their house. But they're selling now. And that's not the same. Because when you're selling, there's money involved. And when it comes to business, you can't trust people. Unfortunately, it's time and time again, the nicest, the best, the most trustworthy people. When there's money involved, unfortunately, bad decisions are made. And there's two reasons. Number one is ignorance. People just don't know the law. So you need to have somebody who's telling you what to do in this case. How do you check masses, crates of lettuce when you need to do this? We're talking about major amounts of salads, under pressure. What are those standards? How is it washed? How is it checked? What happens if you're in a rush? What do you do in these situations? There's just a basic ignorance as to what to do. That's number one. And then also bad decisions. Food service is one of the most pressurized industries. It's such a hard industry. You own a restaurant and you have a restaurant full of people and you run out of inventory. What do you do right then? And they're demanding and they're going to review and they're going to scream at the waiters and they're going to call the maitre d'. And what are you going to do right now? It's so much easier just to go next door and get a tub of cream cheese from Costco. It's cheaper. Right? Bad decisions happen under pressure very easily. Cheese and meat are the most expensive Jewish products. And they look just the same when they got no label on them. Just understand. Bad decisions are very easy. And I know of so many stories, unfortunately, of so many restaurants that would pay mashgichim to check a bit of the produce, and then they'd bring in the back door the rest of the produce. And they'll be feeding to Jewish customers produce which was unchecked, which means people are eating bugs. There's no question they're eating bugs. If you check through lettuce, these things happen because money and ignorance, which means you need to have an outside agency which is checking. And it's not just any else. You need to have an outside agency which is telling this is how to do, this is what we're doing, and we can tell the consumer that this was checked. Which is why there are Kosher agencies, there are regulating bodies. So you ask yourself, why are there so many? Why are Jews, like you go to Israel, there are so many. So the first reason is because of standards, which means they're not all kashrus created equal. So there's many different standards. So as an example, there's Chalav Yisrael and not Chalav Yisrael. Does the milk need to be observed from the time it is milked, or is it enough that the FDA or the local government standards and penalties are sufficient to be able to assume that in that place? Do you keep the idea of Charash and Yashon in Chutz La'aretz? Are you concerned about the worms which appear in salmon? Right, the worms appear in salmon. If they haven't been Yotze L'Avira Olam, is that a concern or not? And a sack of salmon. Are you concerned about ground up bugs in strawberry preserves? There's many just different psakim when it comes to halacha as how these apply, and it's not the same. There's differences in halacha, which means different kashrut agencies will be catering different standards to the different clientele that they're dealing with. This is complicated because then at the end of the day, that just means that the onus of financial responsibility comes down to the store owner. Because a lot of times in a place, like let's say you go to Brooklyn or Manhattan, so you'll have multiple, a store owner will have to cater to multiple different crowds by getting different hashgachas, which means he's paying a few times to different agencies. There's another reason for other agencies, it's important to be aware of this, is kashrus is also a business. For many communities. And it's an interesting business in the sense that you don't need a degree to be in kashrus. Now you need a lot of expertise, and it's very hard to be in kashrus, but you don't need a degree, which means certain parts of the Jewish community which are not sending their children to university, this is a career, right? And the Hasidic world, there are many hashgachas because it provides many jobs. And so one should appreciate the fact that there's also that angle of that, which is fine, but just understand that that's a different angle. I would still say that the best model is what's called a vada kashrus. A vada kashrus means is that it's not a for-profit organization. It's not to give jobs to people. It's simply the rabbonim of the town saying these are the standards that are important in our town. We're going to employ professionals who are going to do this, and we'll provide multiple tiers within it. So, example, in our town, if you look at any restaurant, there's a checklist on the restaurant door, which means there's different standards. And the consumer can make a choice, the restaurant owner can make a choice. And the beauty of that is that as opposed to saying, grade A or grade B, or which, because there are different things that people are worried about, And as opposed to saying we'll have multiple hashgachas, which everybody has to get multiple layers from, then it's transparent. Everybody can make decisions as to what they want to serve based on their clientele. More than that, there's another reason for more kashrus agencies as well. Unfortunately, because it is a business, there's also people who are not reliable. Unfortunately, there are not reliable symbols. And you'll say, but I know Rabbi so-and-so. It's not because of who the person is. There may be a very respectable rabbi on that symbol, and he may have all the greatest letters on his thing. The reason not because of the rabbi, it's because of standards. It's because of procedures, not because of standards, which is important to realize. Systems and procedures is what makes kashrus. Is there a camera system? Are there logs on a daily basis? Are you seeing the challah logs? Do you have what's the checklist in the kitchen if the mashkiach isn't there internally as to what's going on in that restaurant? These are what's called standards and procedures. If those aren't there, more than likely, if a mistake will happen, if it can happen, it will happen. So that's the reason why, unfortunately, when you go to Trader Joe's, which is providing, every day they've got a new hashgacha in Trader Joe's. It's like, where did we get the air balloon K from? They've got something new every single day. So not all of those are reliable. That's because unfortunately there's somebody who's giving kashrus, but is not overseeing it in the way that you and me perhaps would be comfortable with necessarily. And it's not just politics. It just means to say that somebody wasn't doing the job on the boots on the ground. They were coming to collect the check, but they weren't necessarily doing this. Why?
Trader Joe is not under the VAR?
What was that?
Trader Joe not under the VAR?
No, of course not. No. Trader Joe's has hundreds and hundreds of symbols. Many of them are fine. Many of them are not fine.
I find it hard to believe that during the times of the Talmud and before, that people were checking every piece of green thing for...
Well, I think, first of all, how much green things would they have available? First of all, like the amount of lettuce. People were not eating out like we were eating today, so people were not ordering salads and hors d'oeuvres and salads upon it. They simply weren't, right? So most people sat at home and ate, right? So the case of catering became less of an issue in a society when less catering was happening, number one. But number two is that, yes, people did check when it came to things that were of a concern. They did check. They were not putting out microscopes. So there are certain kashrus agencies which have very, very high standards when it comes to this, and it's simply not the reality. But checking in the light, that's doable. What makes it more difficult today is the volume. When you have hundreds and hundreds of people going to a restaurant, the amount of volume is you know how long it takes to check 24 crates of lettuce? It's crazy, but that's because we're eating 24 crates of lettuce, and most people aren't even eating; they're just getting it and throwing it away. But the point is that that's the more complex reality. In those days, much less consumerism, and just simply people and their moms would this is what mom would tell, and this is how it worked. It's just
in the case of a restaurant or a club that is 100% kosher, but the VAD or the agency that gives the hashgacha wants to withhold it because of reasons other than the kashrut.
So that's actually not the rule of a vada. That's not kashrus. That's vada rabbanim. It's a separate department, and that is what's called communal standards. And there is a separate department for that. Not offline, because it's much more complicated. Let me just finish a few more things, because I really wanted to get to a few more things. Why is there some Jews say I can eat out cold, right? So the answer is, it's a fallacy. It's ridiculous. If you're going to eat out, if there's no outside agency which is checking the ingredients, you're more than likely eating treif, no matter what they say to you, because to them it's immaterial. Kashrus to them is the same as asking them to jump up and down on their left foot 3 times. It's immaterial. It means nothing. As long as the customer is happy and they tell you and you're happy, then you're fine. Moreover than that, there's so many other things besides ingredients. There's what's called bishul akum. Bishul akum means if a non-Jew is cooking for a Jew, and it's something which is of respectable dish which cannot be eaten raw without cooking, and they produce it, you can't eat it. So like the people who eat out fish, they're cooking the fish for you. You can't eat that. It doesn't make a difference. How forget the equipment and forget what they're cooking on in the pans they're using. I mean, it's trade. There's no way to explain this. There's like I was speaking to friends who are rabbis in other places, and like eating out cold is like a thing. I'm like, eating out fish, I'm like, that's ridiculous. I've never heard anything more ridiculous. It's like mamish eating tray. You have a salad there? Do you know what? You're eating a salad. It's like eating pork. Like I'm saying, because the salad is more like, if it's not a checked salad, it's only a matter of time. You eat 3 salads, you definitely have eaten a bag. You didn't see it. I don't know. Yeah, because you didn't look. It's very easy to see the bags if you know what you're looking for. It's like it's visible to the eye. You just need to look at it, right? Now, why is it that Jews feed their animals before they eat? This is a halacha. Do you know that? If you have a pet, you need to feed your pet before you eat. And that is seen as an element of mercy. You're not allowed to consume. If something's dependent on you for food, you need to feed it before you eat as well. Why is that Jews wash their hands before they eat bread? The truth is that this goes back to an ancient custom 2,000 years ago, based on the times when there was tumah and tahara. And when hands become impure, you can impurify food. Another reason is because of srach truma, which means that if you're going to touch truma, it's going to invalidate the truma which the kohanim can eat. Because of those two reasons, it was instituted today as a vestigial reminder just by bread. It used to be by all food. It wasn't just bread. Today, because bread is a staple, it's the most common of foods, we still wash for breads as a reminder, Yiboneh Beis HaMikdash, that it will still be in that mode. And we don't do it all about other foods except one time a year, and that is the Leil HaSeder. Because that's actually how it was all times, right? Anything that you'd be eating with your hands and there's tibula b'mashke, you would need to do this as well. Why is it that Jews have salt at the table? Reason for salt is because you're not going to be speaking. And when you're not speaking, there's no divrei Torah. If there's no divrei Torah, there's a moment of kitrug, it's a moment of weakness, and the salt is seen as a bris olah, but more as an eternal covenant of God protecting the nation of Israel. Goes to show you, by the way, that sometimes I think in some tables it's actually better when there's more silence, because that means they're not saying as much bad stuff about everybody else. But nonetheless, we're hoping that's not the situation, but nonetheless, it's meant to be, silence is seen as a negative thing because there's not intellectual conversation about ideas in Torah. That's what's missing, and that's the kitrug. But it should definitely not be the other way around as well. But the other reason is, what? Oh, so it's actually every day. It's seen as every day. Yeah, you should have salt at your table. And more than that, most people always think about this Shabbos, but that Shabbos is usually the time we have bread. People don't always have bread during the week, but if you have bread during the week, it should be the time because you're washing, that's the thing. The other reason is because the table is seen as a mizbeach, as an altar, which is amazing. The Gemara says a beautiful thing. The Gemara says today we don't have the mizbeach, which is mechaper, which atones, so our tables atone, which means you need to have salt because b'kol korbanecha takri melach. You need to have salt on your korbanos, which means your table needs to have salt as well. Then, what other question is why is it that Jews hide or remove the bread knife before benching? This is weekday and Shabbos too. Some people say maybe not even needed on Shabbos. Why is that? So there's two reasons which are given. One is because if it is like an altar, if it's like a mizbeach, you're not allowed to have a knife. An implement of sharp metal is an implement of murder, of killing. The mizbeach was a place of bringing shalom into the world. You can't have the two together, which is amazing because you're allowed to have the knife on the table the whole meal, except for when you bench, which means when you bench is the most critical. When you bring spirituality to your table is the time when you make it into mizbeach, which you bring it into altar. Which means if you walk around until you forget to bench, you don't bench, that means you missed the opportunity of elevating it into an altar, just to clarify this. The other reason you brought, which is very strange, the Beis Yosef says, is there was a fellow who was benching one day, and he was so upset when he got to Uvnei Yerushalayim about the fact that Jerusalem was destroyed that he took the knife and he impaled himself there at the table. That must have been a very difficult meal, right? So the Gemara says, because of that, we take the knife off. Now, generally speaking, that's not how you regulate, right? Again, if you're a regulating body, you don't regulate based on the crazies, right? That's strange. That's not usual, right? So why should you make that every normal person had take their knife off the table? When was the last time you had thoughts of taking their knife off? God forbid, right? So the reason is, right? J.J. Shafter once mentioned this. He says because we remember that it's possible to care that much. I mean, we remember that is possible. That people, he wasn't crazy. We're just not. We're just apathetic, right? So so we take the knife off to say there are some people who care enough. That might be the case as well. Why is that Jews wash their hands at the end of the meal? So we'll last two questions. The reasons why Jews wash their hands at the end of the meal is because two reasons. The Gemara says because of making yourself holy before benching, like the same reason as washing at the beginning of the meal. The other one is because of melech Sodomes, salt from Sodom. Have you ever met that? The answer is probably not today, because it is most likely the Koren Talmud has in the Achulin Daf Kuf Hayam Beis, where it discusses this. The Gemara Kuf Hayam Aleph. The Gemara discusses this. It has a footnote there, and this is what it says. It is probably referring to magnesium chloride, MgCl2, which is found in extremely high concentrates in the Dead Sea. That's where Sodom was, right? Which is consistent with the name Sodomite salt, which is the location of Sodom. Magnesium chloride can easily be intermingled with regular salt, which is extracted in great quantities along the shores of the Dead Sea. Since magnesium chloride is poisonous, there is a danger that its introduction to the eye by the unwashed hands could lead to eye infection. Fascinating. In the days when people were eating with their hands, they would touch their bread, they would touch the salt, they would put it by their eyes, so wash your hands at the end of the meal. We know that the Melech Sodom doesn't exist today. That's because our salt is safe. Table salt is called. What's our salt? We usually use sodium chloride, right? NaCl2. No, so that it's a much simpler salt than the MgCl2. So the magnesium chloride, sodium chloride. By the way, just so you should be aware of salt. Salt is made of two of the most dangerous substances in the world, right? Sodium. If you have raw sodium is so dangerous it can't be stored in air because it interacts with the air. It has to be stored in alcohol. If you take raw sodium and you put it on your tongue, it will burn through your mouth and go through your bottom of your jaw. If you put sodium into a toilet, it will blow up the toilet. Sodium is a very dangerous substance. And if you take chlorine is used. The Germans figured this out in World War I. Chlorine gas was how they killed people. You take these two crazily dangerous elements, you put them together, and you have table salt. It's an amazing thing, right? And we use it all the time, right? But nonetheless, salt's very stable, but they're two very dangerous substances put together. But we don't have Melech Sodom today, which is why some people don't do Mayim Achronim, whereas some people still do because of the other aspect of it. Rav Shecht, in his comment on the Siddur, makes the observation is that Melech Sodom also relates to an attitude as well, not just a actual chemical element. The attitude of sheli, v'shelcha, shelcha is an element which a lot of people have, and especially when it comes to food. It's like, this is my property, this is my things, and you deserve this, you don't deserve this. That type of attitude needs to be washed out. We remind ourselves at the end of every meal as well. Last point over here, and that is as follows: why do we spill wine out on Motzei Shabbos at Havdalah? Right, so the Ramah tells us this, and the reason is because the Gemara says, kol bayis, any house which does not have wine, which is spilled like water, is not going to have bracha, will not see bracha. What's the reason for that? So the Ramah says, based on that Gemara, you should spill wine out at Havdalah. Okay, so everybody says, but you're wasting wine, right? Like, what's the deal with this? So the Taz explains that first of all, you shouldn't spill it out, you should just pour so it overflows. I mean, so when you fill up the cup, pour a little bit over that overflows, so you're not actively spilling out. He says the reason is, and I'll close with this because it's such a profound idea, he says there's no magic incantation. He says life is going to happen. And when life happens, people get very upset. And they get very upset, and the kid broke this, and somebody tripped over that, and everybody gets upset about all kinds of things. He says, you know what? Wine spills, water spills, it's all right. If you have a house in which that when wine spills, it's like water spills, and nobody really cares, nobody's getting upset or uptight about things, then you can ask your Seman Bracha. It's psychological. There's no spiritual incantation here. You have to have. It's seen as close to divine, but the idea is that it's all right. It's all right. My possessions aren't more important than the people who trip over those possessions, and that's what's said over here. So we'll close with this. There's a lot of ideas we covered today. Thank you so much for your.